Hi guys, welcome back, or welcome if you're new. My name is Caitlin, and somehow we're already halfway through the year. I don't really know how that happened, but it's July. Actually, it's July 4th now as I'm recording this. Oddly enough, very un-July 4th like weather. It's very rainy today, so it's kind of gloomy, but I think we should just absorb the gloomy vibes and lean into them. So I've got my coffee here and I'm ready to talk about some books. With June wrapping up, it's the perfect time to sit down and talk about all the books that I read in Q2, so April through June. I was originally going to film this video and have it posted like right on June 1st at the very beginning of the month, but I ended up delaying the filming a little bit so I could add one more book to the end of the list, and I'll explain why when I get to that book. I'll be honest, this quarter was a roller coaster. I DNF'd more books than I have ever. I had a lot of 5-star reads. I read some truly terrible garbage, and there was kind of just a lot in between too. So I'm really excited to break down what I read with you guys. So grab a snack or a drink and let's just chat. So I have some quick stats to break down for the quarter before we get into the actual books. I feel like this year I'm really coming into my own as far as the books that I really enjoy reading. I've really locked down the specific genres that I find myself coming back to over and over again, but I do try to branch out every once in a while, so I was curious kind of what types of genres that I was reading this quarter. So I did a breakdown. I read 8 literary fiction books. Obviously, that's my favorite genre. I read 4 fantasy books, 3 romance books, 3 contemporary fiction books, and 2 thriller books. I also technically DNF'd 3 books. Only one of them I truly DNF'd. The other 2 I may come back to. I actually technically DNF'd 4 books, but one of them I truly read the first 2 pages and then I did a bunch of research on what it was actually about, and then I was like, I'm good. This is not a book I should have ever picked up in the first place, so I didn't even include it because it was such like a blip. My average page count was 348 pages per book. I feel like that tracks pretty well for the books that I read. I read a lot of bigger books this quarter, some fantasy and stuff like that, so that makes sense. And my average rating, I was surprised. It was 4.06 stars, which means I'm mostly giving books 4 stars, and I've definitely noticed that I do feel like I tend to rate books 4 stars a lot. I'm trying to be more critical and understand what is it about my rating that often falls in that area. I don't rate a lot of books 5 stars, which is funny because I actually had a lot of 5-star books this quarter, but I tend to kind of sit in around the 4 and 3 area, and it's oftentimes hard for me to differentiate between a 3 and a 4. Like, it's really kind of just what resonated with me more as far as the content. If the content didn't really resonate me, I tend to rate it lower. So the first book I read in April, we're starting things off with a bang. Tom Lake. I loved this book. It was so good. This is a book that kind of goes back and forth between a present and a past timeline, and the present is set in kind of the early days of the COVID-19 pandemic, and it's basically told by this woman, Laura, who is in the present day a mother to 3 girls. She's kind of telling them the story and reflecting of a sort of pivotal summer that she had in her youth in Michigan, where they currently live. So it kind of follows her in the present telling the story to her daughters while they're picking cherries on their cherry orchard, and the past as she's sort of living through it at that time. It's really a book about like love and loss, and I felt like just the quiet intimacy of family. I know that I really am liking a book when I start annotating it from the very beginning. I'll often tab my pages as I'm reading, but I won't highlight or write in the book until after I'm done reading it, because I like to be able to come back to it having the full scope of the story. Literally on page 7 that I was like, I have to start writing in this book because it's just so interesting. I just loved it. It was one of those books that I couldn't stop thinking about it when I was out of the house. Like, all I wanted to do was come back home so I could read more of it, and that does not happen often with me. Ann Patchett is quickly becoming a writer I feel like I need to read more from, just because I loved this book so much. Like, her prose and her writing style is so stunning. The way she crafts a sentence is so interesting. Like, it doesn't try to be overly flowery or long for the sake of, you know, trying to make a point with a sentence structure or the overall structure. I feel like with her, every word is purposeful. The pacing is just perfect. It's almost like sorcery. There was something about that prose that was so special to me. This book explores themes of love, family, of grief, the burdens and expectations that we have within family dynamics. What stayed with me the most was her portrayal of someone with alcoholism, someone with an addiction. I felt like it was such a real and true representation of that identity and of what it feels like to be a person in the the orbit of someone like that. I was just blown away by that. That was a storyline that I wasn't really expecting. Like, this very much is about Laura and her story, but there is a particular person in this story. Her life doesn't exist without this other person. She has to acknowledge this person's presence in her life to move forward. Their dynamic, it was so frustrating at the beginning, and then at the end, I'm just crying. It was so beautiful. What you'll learn makes books very successful for me is how much I'm able to relate to not just the main character, but like their dynamics as people. And that was a dynamic I felt like I was really able to relate to and felt like it was explored with like such emotional clarity. That juxtaposed with sort of the present day story of her with her family locked up in their house and just like being a family. It was such a breath of fresh air. Like, I really loved those scenes where they're all just sort of sitting around the table talking, or they're, you know, picking cherries out in the orchard, chatting with each other. Like, it felt very cozy. It still felt like it had substance. Like, it wasn't just for the vibes. There was a reason. I feel like it perfectly, for me, represented what it's like to spend time with my family, although my family is usually a lot more chaotic than their family, but the same vibes, that we are all here just enjoying our time together. But the book also didn't shy away from the messier parts of family either. So I feel like I appreciated that balance. I loved the exploration of motherhood. Like, it was handled thoughtfully. It was such a beautifully told, very contemplative novel. I loved it. I definitely want to read it again. So we started the quarter off good because this book was obviously a 5-star read for me, and I loved every second of it. So yeah, that was Tom Lake. The next book that I read in April was Sharp Objects by Gillian Flynn. I don't even know why I read this. I think just because it was short and it was on my shelf. I think I was doing that thing where like I had just read a literary fiction novel, and so I was like, let me read something completely opposite. This book is basically about sort of like a troubled journalist who returns to her hometown to cover a murder, I guess a series of murders that happened. She has to, because she's back in her hometown, she has to confront all these people from her past and like things that happened in that town from her past as she's sort of unraveling this mystery. I don't really have honestly much to say about this one, other than I think I realized reading this that Gillian Flynn's writing style is just not for me. Her descriptions of like trauma and abuse, I just felt like it felt overwhelming and like uncomfortable for me. I can feel in my body that I don't like what is happening, and it's really hard for me to kind of turn that around. That like grating against my insides, like I just don't like. I don't know, it makes me feel so uncomfortable. It's really hard for me to move through that or move past that. I feel like I struggle to connect with any of the characters. Her bread and butter is writing these like really emotionally complex characters. They're definitely troubled in some way, so I find it hard to relate to them. Like I just said, is, you know, kind of a big part of enjoying a book for me. I feel like because of that, it was just hard for me to stay invested, and so ultimately like it just became kind of forgettable. The ending twist, it didn't land for me either, and I was talking to another friend who had read this book and she kind of had the same sentiment. It felt abrupt and also kind of laughable. Like, I just found it to be not very believable and I can't really talk about it without spoilers, but it just didn't give the emotional payoff that I wanted. I definitely don't think that this book was badly written at all. It's very well written. It is just not a book that was written for me to enjoy, and that's okay. So yeah, that was Sharp Objects. Just because of my lack of enjoyment of it, I gave it 2 stars. Again, it's not a badly written book. It just wasn't, you know, for me. The next book that I read was A Torch in the Night by Sabaa Tahir. This is the second book in the Ember and the Ashes series, which I have up here, and I really enjoyed it. For context, I read the first book at the end of Q1, like it was the last book that I read in March, and I thought it was fantastic. It was a great example of YA writing. It definitely feels like a book that inspired a lot of content in Fourth Wing. Like, they're very similar. I just personally feel it's way better written. No tea, no shade. And I gave that book 4 stars because I did really enjoy it. And the second book, I also gave 4 stars. It keeps a strong pace. There's great forward movement. The main issue or thing that we're working towards felt very interesting. It felt like it was high stakes. It felt like there was a reason to keep going. And I also really appreciated sort of the deepening character development of the 3 main characters in this book. In this book, we do get introduced to Helene as a character perspective, which at first I was really annoyed by, and I still feel like I was annoyed by it. I just didn't care about her chapters really at all compared to Leia and Elias's, and so I kind of was like, what's the point? Obviously, she's very central to the entire plot of the series, but I just was annoyed by it. The world building also continues in a meaningful way. Overall, it was well written, it was engaging, it definitely left me excited for the next book, so for that reason, it got 4 stars. The next book I read was obviously A Reaper at the Gates by Sabaa Tahir. This is the 3rd book in the series, and I'm not even really giving synopses for these ones because if you haven't read the first 1 or 2 or 3, it could be a spoiler. So just to say, this 3rd book, the plot in it, I feel like I don't even know what happened. Like, I don't know what the plot was. This book could have just been pretty much lost, and like the things that happened in it could have happened in either book 2 or book 4. Like, this book I feel like could have been trimmed down to become a trilogy, and it would have been so much more effective. I feel like this one just failed to hold my attention. Again, I don't even remember really what happened in the book. Like, even the synopsis that I wrote, nothing is happening in it. Everyone's just like struggling and determining what to do next, and that's really kind of what this book felt like for me. There was so much emotional pining between certain characters that I did not enjoy. There was just not enough forward momentum. This was like where my Q2 reading slump started, and because it took me so long to read those books, that was all I read in March. I read 4 books in March, which is pretty standard for me, but I definitely read a lot more in May and June. Y'all, I read a lot in May. I did find a lot of really good books this month, and I also did a lot of tandem reading with my Kobo and my audiobooks, so I was crushing through a lot of books this month and in June. The first book I read in May was, of course, number 4 in the Ember and the Ashes series. This one was A Sky Beyond the Storm by Sabaa Tahir. I will say this was a solid ending of the series. I definitely appreciated the closure and sort of like emotional wrap up of everything between certain characters, but it just didn't hit me as hard as I was hoping. I feel like compared to the sort of resolutions of series that I love, like Throne of Glass, for example, honestly, even ACOTAR, like thinking of just the first trilogy, the sort of ending to those, from what I remember, it's been a long time since I read them, but I feel like I just really love the way that sort of war is described in those series, and I feel like the battles and actual like war happening here was pretty rushed. Like, everything happened so quickly, and so as soon as I was like getting into intensity of it, it was just over. And there was one moment where something happened and I felt like it kind of just came out of nowhere. It was sort of there just for like emotional impact, and I wasn't able to really form much of a connection with that character either. They were very much kind of just like there, and so I don't know. I feel like it was just there for shock value more than anything. I found myself wanting more emotional connection between 2 characters in particular. I just feel like overall the romance in the series could have been explored a little bit more. I just feel like overall I wanted more out of the series, and I needed it to be like tightened up. I wanted more emotion, more payoff, and just like more refinement overall. So my rating for the 4th book, I gave it 4 stars, but if I did half stars, it would be like a 3.5. Rounded up to 4. After finishing that series, was very much in a reading slump. I was getting ready to film my Boyfriend Picks My Books videos, but I always read in the morning, so I needed something like quick to read the morning before I did that. I picked up the shortest book on my shelf, which is The Grownup by Gillian Flynn. I got this for like a couple bucks, and so I just happened to have it and was like, oh, it's only 60 pages? Great, I'll read it in one sitting, and that's what I did. This book is about this woman who basically, through a series of kind of weird and random events, ends up as like a psychic reader at one of those places that you just see kind of like off the highway. A woman comes in and basically tells her that her Victorian house is haunted and needs her help, kind of like cleansing it essentially. And what kind of unfolds after that is really kind of is crazy. This reminded me of stories that I read when I was in like middle school and high school, like when you would go online and read those short stories about, you know, like the woman with the ribbon around her neck or stuff like that. It gave me those vibes, and it almost felt nostalgic in that way. It was very quick. Obviously, I finished it in, you know, one sitting. It was very punchy and fast-paced for that reason. I definitely liked it more than Sharp Objects. I mean, the main character was pretty fleshed out for it being so short. Plot was interesting. Again, it was like punchy. There was quite a bit happening. The ending was pretty clever, and I feel like it was satisfying. It was kind of funny. So overall, I feel like it was a fun and sharp short story. Again, not really my vibe overall. Still didn't really love a lot of like the language and the prose used, but I thought it was decent. So for that reason, I gave it 3 stars. It was an interesting story to just kind of pick up and read. The weather is very quickly changing around, so I'm sorry if the lighting is all over the place. The next book that I read in May was I Who Have Never Known Men by Jacqueline Harpman, and this was the first of the 3 books that I reviewed for my Boyfriend Picks My Books video. So because that video is out there, I will just do kind of like a short recap here. I loved this book. If you haven't seen that video, I loved it so much. It's one of those sort of like quiet, unsettling, slowly haunting reads that it just sticks with you. I have not stopped thinking about the ending of this book. This book is about a young girl that is being held captive with 39 other older women in an underground bunker, and they are suddenly freed decades later and have to sort of reconcile with the outside world around them. I really just loved the themes of like what makes us human and our connectivity with others. It explores humanity's desire for knowledge. It was just so beautifully done. There's such a sense of ambiguity that I loved in this novel, like in the setting. I loved the exploration of connection between the narrator and those around her, the way they care for each other, like even in the bleakest of circumstances. It was just really moving, and the ending was devastating. I was crying, and I've seen that this book is getting a lot more attention this year, I think because of TikTok, and I'm really happy about that. I would highly recommend it to anyone. I have already recommended it to a couple friends. It's very good, and yeah, this was definitely a 5-star book for me. I really, really enjoyed it. Oh my gosh, I actually just realized I DNF'd 5 books. I didn't even include The Kraken Wakes. It was another book from that video that I read about the first like 50 to 100 pages of. So this was DNF, which I also explained in that video, but mostly just due to the writing style, the style of prose. It just wasn't for me. It wasn't holding my interest. The next book I read, also as part of that video, was Morbidly Yours by Ivy Fairbanks. This is a contemporary romance about a woman who moves from Texas to Ireland after the recent passing of her husband. Her name is Lark, and she moves in next door to Callum, who lives at and runs the mortuary next door. And Callum basically has to get married by his 35th birthday in order to be able to take over the family business that he's running. She's very much the golden retriever to his black cat. I really liked their dynamic. It started off so strong. The vibes were great. The dialogue was charming. I particularly loved Callum's character. He was very honest and very tender and very emotionally available. But unfortunately, the third act kind of just lost me. It was very miscommunication heavy. The drama didn't feel necessary. It was just getting really tropey for me. And I also didn't really care for like the villain main character. He just felt very black and white in a way that didn't feel like he was a real person. So that's it. If you're looking for sort of like a cozy romance with great banter, like good chemistry, it's definitely still worth checking out. I would definitely still recommend this novel. It got 4 stars for me, which for contemporary romance is the highest I usually go. So I definitely still liked it. And yeah, that's all I can really say about it. The next book and last that I reviewed for that video was Department of Speculation by Jenny Offill. This book is definitely in the running for my favorite books of this year. I loved this, and if you guys have seen that video, you saw me rave about this for what felt like 20 straight minutes. This is a story that is told kind of in fragments. It's almost like a novella about a woman who is exploring her unraveling marriage and like motherhood and her creative life, sort of like the restraint that she's facing. One of the things I really loved about this book is the format. It's told in these like short bursts and like paragraphs that feel just like thoughts or observations about the world around her. It felt like we were truly living in this person's brain, and that is what I love. It's more of like observation rather than traditional narration, which I really like. I really resonated with this character. I resonated with a lot of the things and feelings that she was experiencing throughout the book, which again, you know, ding 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 is why I end up loving books, because I feel like I can relate to the people in them. You just get so completely like pulled into her world. She's very vulnerable with the things that she's experiencing and talking about. These aren't easy topics to grapple with, like motherhood and identity and marriage, infidelity, like our ambition through all of that, who we are as individual people versus in a marriage. It was just really thoughtfully explored, and I felt like the pacing was wonderful. There is a literary device, like a shift that happens in the third act. It like shot this book up to the top for me. So genius. Like that is how I can explain this book, is genius. And I love the way it explored sort of the evolution of love over time, especially as it relates to a marriage. There's a theme that I particularly love, which is how women kind of use marriage and use kids and motherhood as a way to sort of like save themselves, to like give their lives like structure and meaning. It was emotional, it was lyrical, it was very human, and I loved it. How many times can I say that? Take a shot every time I say I love something, but I did. So this was 5 stars, if you couldn't tell. The next book that I read in May was The Great BBL by Emily Henry. Sorry, that was so cringe. I read Great Big Beautiful Life by Emily Henry. I am not an Emily Henry reader. I have read Book Lovers and I enjoyed it, and I saw this book on sale and was like, sure, I'll buy it. So this is sort of a literary romance romance about two rival writers who are competing to be able to write a memoir about a sort of reclusive heiress, like somebody who used to be famous, and her name is Margaret. So they kind of dig into her past, and it's told through, again, this sort of back and forth where we hear stories from Margaret's past, also intertwined with like Alice and Hayden in the present, unpacking all of that, and also like falling for each other, basically. So this was a pretty engaging read overall, especially for how long it is. I was surprised by how quickly I moved through it, but looking back on it, I just feel like it didn't really leave an impression on me. I feel like Margaret's storyline was by far the most compelling part for me, and I feel like I see a lot of people online who have the opposite opinion, where they hated Margaret's sections and were like, I just want the romance between Alice and Hayden. I also understand that sentiment too. The literary element is what I enjoy of the book, therefore that's why I liked her sections more than the romance. I just don't feel like I really related or resonated with Alice or Hayden as characters. I feel like we didn't really get a lot of Hayden as a character, and for me to be really invested in a romance, I need to be invested in the man as well. I feel like their relationship just felt surface level. Like it almost felt like teenagers having a relationship to me. I don't really know why I felt that way. I just didn't really feel anything while it was unfolding. And by the time we got to the twist at the end, it felt like a bunch of plot points were just being thrown together without like a real through line for it all. Like I don't really know why that had to happen. I feel like the ending was very emotionally unresolved for me. I didn't like it. I personally was just kind of like, why is this here? And I feel like there wasn't that much romance that was really explored between the two characters. Like it was certainly a romance novel, but it kind of was more focusing on Margaret's story and then how that sort of at the end like unfolds and impacts these other characters. So I don't know. I just was kind of like, meh. I didn't dislike it. It just was okay. So it got 3 stars for me. It didn't make me feel anything, and it just kind of existed and was fine. The next book that I read was First Time Caller by B.K. Borison. It was on my Spotify Premium audiobooks, so I listened to it. It's set in Baltimore, where the main character, Lucy, that's her name, right? Yeah, Lucy. Where main character Lucy discovers that her 12-year-old daughter is talking to someone on the phone late at night, and when she goes to confront this person on the phone, it is a radio host. She finds out that her daughter has basically called into a love radio show hotline to talk about her mom, to talk about Lucy. And I'm gonna be honest, I already forgot the male main character's name. You can tell this book also didn't really hit for me. It was just kind of forgettable for me. It basically follows Lucy, who is asked to come on this radio show as part of like a reoccurring segment where she is on her like road to love. And I just feel like this was forgettable for me. And that could partially be due to the fact that I listened to it on audiobook, which I mentioned in previous videos. I'm not an auditory learner whatsoever, so audiobooks can be tricky for me, but that's typically why I listen to like general fiction or like contemporary romance. Maybe that's the reason I also didn't really connect with it, because I didn't have like a physical connection to the text either. But I remember thinking that the character dynamics were fun. The setup was solid. I definitely enjoyed kind of like the dynamics between Lucy and her family. I feel like it's not something that's super common for a romance book that we see. I think my main issue is honestly that this book felt a bit long. I kind of just felt like, what were we doing half the time? There was a lot of emotional pining, and it was another one of those situations, like red herrings and sort of like outside conflicts that I feel like just didn't have to happen. Like they were happening to make it a book. But I personally sometimes just want a love story where two people say, hey, I like you and I want to be with you. Let's figure that out together. Let's just be together and make it work. Like, I am not personally a fan of like we really want to be together, but we can't because of A, B, C through Z, which are all not actual like real concrete reasons. They're just like things that you're making up in your head as a reason why you don't want to be with this person. I don't know. I find it to be annoying. And I think that was kind of my main issue with this book, is that it's just not a story I was really interested in reading. I just feel like it doesn't have to be that complicated. And the spicy scenes were too much for me, like way too much, which I've talked about before. It's just not really my vibe when certain words start to get used. It really just kind of takes me out of it. So yeah, I can't even remember what I rated that book. It was fine. I just didn't care about it at all. The next book that I started to read in May was 100 Years of Solitude by Gabrielle Garcia Marquez. I shelved this book for now. This is a sort of multi-generational saga that follows the Buendia family. It's kind of a book that has like themes of magical realism blended with like political and existential themes. It seemed super interesting. The writing was very interesting. I just read it at a point in the month where I was not prepared to consume that kind of content. And so for that reason, I just put it on on the shelf. I'm definitely going to come back to it. This book was not like a true DNF where I know I'm not going to finish it. I liked it. I'm just not going to finish it right now. Like, I want to be able to return to it when I can give it the attention that it deserves. And I was also reading it on my Kobo. I almost feel like I need to read the physical copy, which I do have one. So I'm going to try that and see if like that helps me get more into it. The next book that I read in May was A Tale for the Time Being by Ruth Ozeki, I think is how you pronounce her last name. This book is basically about a writer who lives on kind of a remote island who finds this washed up diary, which were written by sort of like a troubled teenager, I guess. And she kind of becomes increasingly involved in the story as she's reading the diary and kind of trying to like reckon with how she relates to it, her sort of emotional feelings for this girl, and like where the story takes her. This was such like an interesting and I feel like thought-provoking book. I really loved the non-linear structure. I feel like I read so many books this quarter that had that same structure where we kind of go back and forward in time. Maybe that's something I, for some reason, really resonate with. I don't know, but there were themes of kind of time and how it passes, how we participate in it, and sort of like our permanence or impermanence in the world. There was death, war, suicide, like a lot of really heavy topics, even generational trauma. And there were even elements of like the supernatural and like quantum physics here. There was a lot packed into this book. I feel like it was all handled really well, very delicately. I particularly liked Now's character. Her sections were definitely my favorite. Her voice, like she was so funny and earnest. Her observations about the world, I really enjoyed. I definitely had some moments where I laughed out loud at her section. Her storyline with her father, it broke me. It was so tender and also painful and beautiful all at once. And the way that their story kind of intertwines with another sort of like side character in her story life. I think I can't remember if it's her uncle or if it's her dad's uncle, but the way their stories all intertwine is just, it was so beautifully done. By far and away, it was my favorite part of the book. I also love the way this book explored like how time passes and how we participate in it. There's just a lot to unpack here. That being said, I didn't really relate as much to Ruth's storyline. Ruth is the writer who finds Now's diary and is reading through it. I feel like her sections were just kind of a little bit dry for me. I feel like I just didn't connect as much to her character or her storyline. There was a section in her story near the end where, like I mentioned, there was a lot of quantum mechanics. I really kind of just like didn't absorb much of that. So that section kind of lost me, but I didn't really mind it, again, because the like emotional core of Now's story was so strong. Overall, I rated that book 4 stars. I really enjoyed it. I thought it was very moving, and it's a book that I think I would probably read again. I borrowed it from the library, but I definitely would consider buying a physical copy to read again and annotate more thoroughly. All right, moving into June. First book that I read or started to read in June was The Girl on the Train by Palahniuk. That book is kind of, it almost to me felt like Gillian Flynn-esque in terms of the writing style or just like the general plot structure. It is, I think, like a psychological thriller, and it's about a woman who kind of becomes involved in a missing persons case because she often rides the commuter train, and she kind of becomes involved in like a parasocial way with this particular family who lives on the street that she used to live on, that she now passes on the train every day. She basically has a very unreliable memory, and so it kind of gets her in these sticky situations. She becomes involved in the case. That's really all I can kind of remember from it. It just wasn't really holding my attention. I think I got like halfway through the book, maybe. I don't know. I think I did make pretty decent progress in it. It just, again, was kind of a thing where I just wanted to read something else, so I put it down for now, but I definitely think I'll pick it back up later. Again, not a true like DNF, especially because my best friend really enjoyed it and she highly recommended it, so I do want to come back to it. The next book I read in June was my May book of the month pick, and that was The Names by Florence Knapp, and this book was so good. It floored me, like, in the best way. It's very deeply emotional, very literary. You can tell what really pulls me into these books because this one was like multi-point of view story, basically between 3 different men who are all the same person, but it explores the 3 different paths in this person's life dependent on his name, what his mom chooses to name him when he's born. And so it's like 3 branches of the same story, which I just loved. I ate it up. It basically explores like identity, grief, legacy, and like our family history, how that weighs on us, and kind of like what our identity is, how our name can influence our lives. I really thought it was a topic that was explored very thoughtfully. Cora's story in particular, the mother suffers through a lot of domestic abuse and does it all for the sake of her family, which I just felt like was so heartbreaking. Her story is very sad, and there are some tender moments. It's like we feel all of the feelings feelings for all of the characters because they all experience different things in each story. It really was an emotional roller coaster. I just felt like it was so raw, like the exploration of her character and of each point of view of her son. Bear's section in particular, I think it was my favorite of the three just because it was so emotional and the ending wrecked me. I really liked Julian's story, his sort of inner battle, wondering how much of his personhood was shaped by his father, like his shared DNA with this person. It was such an interesting sort of standout through line of his story and how he has to grapple with that. I really appreciated the book's exploration of trauma and how we either like bury it and it affects the rest of our lives, or we process it and it affects the rest of our lives, and how those choices can ripple like generations of people throughout families and friends. The structure I just feel like was super ambitious. I can't believe this is a debut novel also. Like I will definitely be picking up any books that Florence Knapp writes in the future. It was just so good. It totally worked for me. I feel like it was so inventive. Every moment, everything about it, I just loved. It was obviously a big 5-star book for me. So yeah, that was the names. The next book that I read in June, I picked actually as one of the first books in my TBR jar. I picked my June books video, and this was Remarkably Bright Creatures by Shelby Van Pelt. This is sort of like a cozy, kind of quiet, but still moving story about grief and second chances and like human-animal connection. It's told partially from the perspective of a curmudgeonly octopus, and it's set in a coastal Washington town, which is part of the reason why I wanted to even read this book to begin with. I've mentioned before that I am really interested in moving somewhere in that area, so I feel like that is kind of one of the main things that drew me to this book, was the setting, and also I love animals, so a book that's partially told from the point of view of an octopus, like I'm down for. I also just adored everything about him. His perspective was so sharp and surprisingly emotional for such like a logical, observational creature. I was not expecting to get so attached to him, but the way that he has these observations and critiques about humans and our like social cultures, I just thought was really funny. Like I would laugh at a lot of the things that he would say. I also really liked the human characters. Obviously, Tova is sort of the main character. Her grief and the way that she moves throughout the world felt so real. It felt like a perspective on grief that I haven't read a lot of. I thought it was super interesting the way that she kind of processes her grief. I also really liked Cameron's arc. He's another one of the main characters, and their stories were all woven through these like individual random threads of fate, and I thought it was so interesting how it all came together. I called one of the major sort of like plot twists pretty early on, but I was fine with knowing that that's what was going to happen. I just felt like the vibes in the story were so good. It was very cozy. It almost felt like a warm hug, but it was also sad. The setting gave me those warm, cozy, almost like nostalgic feeling I have of being in Washington, like in the Pacific Northwest. And I was feeling that while I was reading this book. So that was definitely keeping me more engaged. And the writing was gorgeous. The ending was just devastating. I was crying for probably a solid hour. Like I couldn't stop. I would stop and then I would talk to Jesse about it and then I'd cry more. So yeah, this book will definitely stay with me for a while. I definitely want to buy the physical copy of it because it was a 5-star book. I will definitely be reading it again. The next book that I read in June was Song of Achilles by Madeline Miller. This was also a pick for my TBR jar video. This is sort of like a more romantic, mythic retelling of the Trojan War that kind of centers around the love story between Patroclus and Achilles. I also don't even know if I'm saying his name right. Is it Patroclus? Is it Patroclus? I don't remember. This book was very beautifully done. I loved that it didn't shy away from the queerness of Achilles and Patroclus' relationship. That was really kind of the center of the story. Like, yes, it is about the Trojan War, but it's really more about their love story. Like, that is sort of what is the emotional core of this book. And it was very natural and very deeply romantic, which I loved. I love yearning. You know, that's one of my favorite things about love stories, and this definitely had that. I also think that getting to experience everything through Patroclus's perspective made it feel better and also more devastating. You could really deeply feel all those moments of love and yearning, but also fear, like trepidation for what is going to happen next. Even if you know like how it's going to end because you know the story, it still doesn't make it any less emotionally impactful. The way that Miller is able to write about that grief and legacy, like that's a big theme in this book is, you know, legacy of these characters. My favorite part was truly the end of the book, like sort of the fallout after the war is over. It's just very raw and emotional. I felt like it was written very well. It was very stunning prose, very lyrical, and I really enjoyed it. So for that reason, I gave it 4 stars. It wasn't like the end all be all for me, but I did really enjoy it. I thought it was very tender. I definitely want to read more from her. So the next book that I read, or rather listened to on audiobook, was Immaculate Conception by Ling Huang. And this is kind of a psychological story about obsession, betrayal, and sort of power within like the art world. This book for me, I feel like had such intense Black Swan energy, especially at the beginning. And I was totally into it. I listened again to it on audiobook, and now I definitely feel like I need to pick up a physical copy to read it because I really liked it, but I want to absorb more of it. I want to be able to annotate it. The story follows Anka, who has this obsessive fixation on her friend and fellow artist Mathilde, and this obsession like slowly spirals and unravels into something like very dark and quite frankly disturbing. What I feel like made it even more compelling is that the story is told through Anka's perspective. That's what makes what she's doing so disturbing, is that we are there in her mind as she is like, you know, weighing the outcome of what she's about to do and still ultimately deciding to continually betray the people that are closest to her in her life. I loved it. I personally love characters like that who are very dynamic and not necessarily great people, but like you really understand their motivations of why they're doing what they're doing. Not that that makes it any better, but I just loved that exploration of her character and sort of her thought process. Watching her justify these like increasingly unhinged actions while convincing herself that it's like the noble thing to do, like she's the martyr. It was just wild. Like her desperation to feel important and feel seen, or like to try to be just enough. It was uncomfortable for me, but like you can't look away. Like I'm so invested in what's going to happen. There were a lot of themes of envy, of class, also the sort of pretentious world of like art and fine art, which is not something that I read about often, but I am interested in. So overall, I just felt like a lot of what Ling Huang was doing here really worked for me, so much so that again, I want to read it again on paper so I can absorb more of it. I did give it 5 stars. So yeah, I loved it, and I definitely want to read her other book, Natural Beauty, because I've heard that that book is also very good. The next book that I read was Fight Club by Chuck Palahniuk, again another book from my TBR jar, and this is sort of like a gritty book about these 2 guys that start a fight club. It's kind of a book about masculinity, identity, how men grapple with that, and these men's sort of like rebellion against that by participating in these fight clubs. This felt pretty in line with other Palahniuk books that I have read. It was very sharp, it was very uncomfortable and kind of gross, like in that specific like Chuck Palahniuk way. I think for that reason, I am probably not going to read much more from him as an author. I think I've outgrown his style at this point in my life. Not to say that he is not a good writer. He's an incredible writer. I just personally, it's similar to Gillian Flynn, where I don't resonate with that type of writing anymore. So I can definitely appreciate his art, and I also think in general, the story that's being told is interesting, and I definitely think there are moments that still stick with you. I just think that the overall kind of nihilistic view in this book, I just didn't really resonate with, so therefore, it just wasn't that exciting for me. I can't remember if I rated it 2 or 3 stars, but yeah, I'm thinking this will probably be the last Chuck Palahniuk book that I read, but that's okay. The next book that I read was highly recommended by a friend of mine, and I mean kind of all of the internet, but that was Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow by Gabrielle Zevin. This is another, surprise, surprise, non-linear story about creative partnership, friendship, grief, sort of life and art, or like in this case, video games. This was highly recommended to me as a lover of video games, and I definitely really enjoyed the video game content in this book. It was more about like game development. It was obviously a strong through line of like the permanence of life versus like how in a video game you can always kind of start over or like change your choices. I totally understand why so many people adore this book. The writing is beautiful. The way that it plays with structure, the non-linearness of the story, it felt like true to memory. Like when you have a memory of something, it sort of just like pops into your mind in the moment that you're doing something else and then you move on. So I really loved how that structure was set up. But I do have to be honest in saying that I did not connect with Sadie's character at all. And for that reason, I could not love this book as much as a lot of people I think did. So much of this book revolves around the dynamic between her and Sam, the 2 main characters who kind of work together to create these video games. I feel like my disconnect with her character shaped my view of their their story together, so I didn't find their story believable. I just found her character to be frustrating, like especially the way that she kind of experiences and reacts to traumatic things that happen to her. As someone who's been in similar situations, I just did not find her reaction to be, not even that it's not believable, just like I did not resonate with her reaction because it's not what I did or what I would have done. Because of that reason, I never really bought into her as a character, and thus her relationships with other people. Sam and Sadie's connection and bond felt more conceptual to me versus emotional. I did love Marx's character though, and I really enjoyed Sam's emotional arc. I definitely think it was a worthwhile read. I loved a lot of the themes that were being explored here. I just felt like it was supposed to be a 5-star book for me because of all the hype that it had, and it just didn't hit quite the same, which is fine. You know, again, I recognize that a lot of my rating of the book has to do with how I resonate with the characters, and I just didn't resonate with Sadie, so, you know, for that reason, this book was a 4-star read for me. It was beautifully written. I love the structure, the non-linear timeline. I just didn't really like Sadie, and that's all. The last book that I started to read as part of my TBR jar video was 3 Women by Lisa Thaddeo. This book, unfortunately, was a true DNF. This is a nonfiction book that is an exploration of kind of the intimate, sexual, and emotional lives of these 3 women, and unfortunately, it was just too triggering for me. There were a couple things that happened that, even still thinking about them, make me feel sick and gross. I just should have read the trigger warnings before I picked up the book because I know myself and I know what is triggering for me based on what I've experienced, so I just couldn't read anymore. I definitely think it seemed like a very interesting book. The themes seemed really interesting. I can't, it's hard for me as someone who is a very emotional reader. It was hard for me to get past, so I had to DNF it. If it's a book that sounds interesting to you and you are aware of the content warnings and that's fine with you, then read it, totally. I'm not saying it was not a good book. I can read it because it wouldn't be healthy or safe for me to do so. All right, we're almost there. We're so close to the end. All right, the second to last book that I read in June was my June book of the month pick, and that was The Summer We Ran by Audrey Ingram. This is another non-linear romance about 2 people who are running against each other for governor who happen to have this sort of like secret past romance from when they were 18. This was hands down the worst book that I have read this year. I hated it so much that there will be a full review video of it coming later this month where I break down how much I actually hated this book. So that's coming soon. So for now, I'm just going to say that it was terrible, and you'll be able to find out why in a couple weeks. And then lastly, the last book that I read was From Blood and Ash by Jennifer Armentrout, and I got this series as a Christmas gift from my parents. I have all 5 of the books sitting down here, and I have heard a lot about this series. I know it's a very popular romantasy series, and so I was like, oh, I should do a video in July where I read all 5 of the books in a month and basically, you know, talk about what I thought about them. And so for that reason, I wasn't going to include this book in my June recap because it was going to be in its own video. And then I actually read the book, and this book is about Poppy. She is a chosen maiden who basically lives this life of like isolation kind of within this sort of like kingdom structure that they live in. And there's this mysterious guard, Hawk, who arrives, and it basically is a story about what unravels in this world. He kind of like challenges her fate. She kind of has to reckon with this life that she is relegated to living. Does she really want to live that? She learns a lot of dark secrets about their world, and I was on board for a solid like 80% of this book. It obviously is not a well-written book. There's not much of a setting. There's not much to any one character, but I was allowing myself to be along for the ride because it gave me vibes of like when I had started Throne of Glass or Akatar. Like it's that similar kind of feeling of, oh, this is like an exciting new fantasy world that I haven't read about, like what's, you know, gonna happen. So the first 80%, you know, not much had happened, but it was interesting enough. And then the last 20% was probably some of the worst literature that I've read, maybe ever. I mean, it was so bad. Like, it was so dumb. I was telling Jesse about it, and I was just like, what is going on? Like, this is so stupid. Spoiler alert. It was just like vampire smut. And like, I don't even know what to say other than it sucked. It got stupid and borderline non-consensual sexual activity. I'm not down for that. It got real weird, real uncomfy for me. The way that these characters, one in particular, would talk to the other person, I did not like the dynamic, so I'm over it. It was just bad. It was bad. And I also can't really explain explain why it was bad because I can't talk about the content without spoiling it. But needless to say, I am just going to take this entire stack of books and go sell it to Half Price Books because I just don't have any interest in reading the other books in the series. I know some people are really good at like knowing that a book is bad or hating a book, but being willing to suffer to like see what happens. I'm not. Like, I'm happy with setting the boundary and being like, I'm done. So, but someone else can enjoy them because it's not going to be me. I'm so sorry. I really wanted to like it enough, or at least like even hate it enough to like hate read them all and review them, but I actually just don't care. Like, I just don't care. Kind of sucks to have to end on a bad note. We did have a lot of highs this quarter. I feel like I found a lot of really, really, really great books that would be in the running for my like best book of the year. So yeah, that was everything that I read in Q2. It was kind of a lot. I almost feel like I should do like Lexi from Newly Nova does. She does like every 2 months she recaps instead of every 3, just because I feel like I read a lot and it was a lot to unpack in one video. Let me know in the comments if you have read any of these. I'm sure some of you have, and I want to know your thoughts. I want to know what you liked, what you didn't like. I'm also curious to know what were your guys' favorite reads of the past 3 months, because I'm definitely looking always for recommendations of what to read. I feel like I got a lot of books checked off my TBR specifically, but like books that have been highly recommended that I see on TikTok. Like, I read a lot of those books in this quarter. So now I'm kind of like, I'm dwindling the books on my shelf and like in my cart that need to be read. So I'm gonna have to pick up some more books soon. So I'm curious what your guys' recommendations are that I should pick up and read next. If you like this video, please feel free to subscribe or leave a like. And yeah, that's it. See you later. Bye.